Welcome to a new episode of our podcast series. I'm the chairman of LSAA, Rainer Westermann, and with us as our guest today is Kristin Thompson. She's the chief operating officer of eureKARE, a Luxembourg-based European VC venture fund. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today, Kristin.
Thank you very much. Very happy to join you today.
So yeah, we're taking a slightly different look at things today because eureKARE is a smaller VC and they have their special challenges and they are slightly different from the large ones like Sofinnova, like Forbion or TVM Capital. So Kristin, what makes eureKARE special? What is it that you do?
Yeah, thank you. eureKARE is special because we're highly focused. And I think that being a smaller firm with a high, basically specialty area allows us to really create a deep network. So we go much further than just being on the surface. That's one thing. And also we have the ability to really accompany all of the founders and all of the companies to the maximum of our capabilities. I think another thing which is special is that we're very flexible. Because we're a smaller firm, this gives us agility. So if we do find a round which is closing quickly, we can try to really mobilize as quickly as possible to finalize the due diligence and to participate. That also means that for the companies in the portfolio, should they need a bridge, it's much easier for us because there's no precedent which needs to be set. Additionally, if someone wants to sell their secondaries within the portfolio, that also gives us a little bit more mobility to do that. I think that's one part that makes it very special. We're also able to analyze the market and tailor our investment decisions based on that. So a bigger firm, they will have a thesis which their fund is set out, and they must follow that for the lifetime of the fund. However, on our end, we can change that. We can say, okay, right now this area seems to be very hot, so maybe we should really concentrate on investments there. Or this is an unmet need, and we really believe that, supporting companies in that space is necessary. I think that's really some of the aspects which set us apart.
Okay, interesting. How would you say is the limit, sort of what counts as small? I mean, Forbion raised a fund is more than $1 billion recently. Where would you say, where are you comfortable? What's your sort of number range?
Yeah, so eureKARE did its initial investment at 60 million dollars, in terms of their first raise, and we've had some additional raise after that. I've seen smaller boutique firms, both in US and Europe and the UK, which are around, 20, 30 million. I think I would definitely classify that as small. We're still in the small range, but I think once you start heading into the 80, 100, you start being considered a little bit larger fund size. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And what are the particular challenges for the smaller VC funds in Europe? We have talked about a number of them, and one of them is, of course, lack of sources of capital, but you have particular challenges.
Yeah. Well, I definitely access to capital is one of the main hurdles. The difficulty with that is that a lot of smaller funds, ourselves included, raised capital post-COVID, when a lot of business angels and high net wealth individuals were very motivated for this space. There was this kind of wave of, we don't want to miss out in the future. So let us invest, and we're going to see some nice return on investment and get great dividends. Now, the problem is that since 2022, that has dramatically changed. We all know that. And JP Morgan already at the start of 2023 was a rather sober event. And I have to say at HTID in France this year as well, it was almost disheartening because the access to capital has really, really decreased. People have gotten very nervous. I think the other aspect is it is very difficult when you have to fit within your management fee structure to be able to do your own due diligence in a high quality way. That's something we've really, pride ourselves on at eureKARE, but we do pay, external scientific advisors and able to feel really confident about the decisions that we make. We also really spend time, within the team looking at these decisions, but that's not something that all boutique firms can do. And I've had discussions with some of them where they say, we'd like to do more investments in order to diversify our risk. However, we just don't have the bandwidth to do that. And considering last year, I would say, even though it was not really life science, the situation with NFX, which just kind of rebounded on some previous scenarios with Theranos, for example, it made people nervous to rely on others' DDs. So yes, you have a great lead investor who's supposedly done their homework, but now you feel a little bit, less certain about whether you can follow their advice. And I think those are two big hurdles today for smaller investors. In Europe as well, it's very difficult to get out of the fray, so to speak. You have a lot of smaller investors. There's not a lot of support from the European level, I would say, to highlight those investors and to highlight their necessity within the ecosystem.
That's interesting. What could change that? How could that be made better?
It's a great question. I do think that there are some positive things which the EU is doing. For example, the pitch contests, which they do, where they invite some external VCs, and some of them are smaller, like ourselves. In January, I'll be, on the jury of an event set up by the EIC, and that does give us some exposition. However, perhaps I think more meet and greets as well, both virtual, definitely virtual would be helpful, because that means more founders can join, because meetings are very expensive. For startups, going to conferences, it's really a choice, right? You have to say, how much is this going to cost? What are the types of contacts I'm going to have? And the same for investors today, actually, because what most people don't really realize is that we have a very tight budget as well. Most of us think investors have money, right? But why do you think so many conferences give a free investor pass? Well, it's because otherwise they wouldn't attend. They have as well a budget they have to meet. And so I think organizing more virtual meet and greets, would be already a great way to foster this interaction. And if you have a mix of maybe bigger and smaller funds, and, a variety of different size biotechs that could meet on a regular basis, I think this would be, very, very helpful in terms of hosting this type of interaction. Of course, money is the easy answer, but I try to find, things that we can do a little bit more constructive.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting point, because indeed, quite a few people think that the fund size determines how rich you are. But in the end, it's money that's from investors that expect you to do diligently work with and not really squander or spread too thin. They want to be invested and successfully invested. So it is a dichotomy, and the dream that sometimes we've heard in Brussels, that you can, as a VC, decide where the money goes, and you can do it on an ethical basis, and you can make a decision to go into something that's maybe not as lucrative. That just doesn't work, because you have a fiduciary responsibility to the limited partners, to those who put the money in the funds. And that's something we try to educate people about, because there is a misconception there.
Absolutely.
But it is a challenge.
Absolutely.
We as LSAA have talked quite a bit about the EU pharma package, a complicated piece of legislation, hundreds of pages long, two pieces, regulation, directive. There's a specific AMR piece. So it's quite complicated, and there's a lot of things in there. Some of them are decent, some of them are actually seen as quite positive. But there's also the centerpiece, which is basically reducing incentives and bringing back conditional incentives to sort of claw back some of the lost market exclusivity and regulatory data protection. How do you see that from your particular perspective?
So, for the EU pharma regulation, there are aspects which I think head into the positive direction. They just simply don't go far enough. On the other hand, there are some detrimental proposals within this legislation, and happy to talk about those a little bit more. Let's start on the positive side. So I do believe that incentives for AMR are necessary. However, in my opinion, the voucher system is just not going to be what moves the needle. Having worked at a biotech focusing on AMR myself, I can tell you that price is still one of the major hurdles because these are not products which command a very high price point. And we start to enter into this vicious cycle because marketing costs a lot of money. And today, there aren't very many manufacturers of antibiotics still active in Europe. Several sites have stopped manufacture of antibiotics because the margins are just not high enough. And that facility can only be used for certain classes of antibiotics. So there is no flexibility there. And so rather than continue producing those, they've just shut those sites down. Now, for me, Europe really should come in and subsidize those manufacturers. There should be a system there that really supports that and to keep the cost, relatively affordable for the CDMOs. The next piece I would say is a voucher of 1 year of IP protection is just not going to get you a partnering deal with big pharma. And that's what most biotechs working on AMR at the end of the day must have. Now, big pharma is going to be under even more pressure based off of the other proposals within this legislation. So we're back to the vicious cycle. So why I do say, great, finally, we're putting AMR on the map in a bigger way. It's just not enough, and it's not, in my opinion, the right way. Other positive points. I mean, yes, making medications available to all patients. This is the nice, utopian ideal. Sounds wonderful. Now, pragmatically, as an investor, that makes me very nervous because I know that's going to cost a lot of capital because these are companies which maybe have the capacity to commercialize their own product in one country. But now for them to have to commercialize that product in all of the member states, they will need to spend a lot of time either hiring people, which is also a lot of money, or they will need to build distribution networks. Now, most of them don't have the competency to do that, which means more hires as well. And a lot of their focus diverted away from being able to fully launch a product in 1 or 2 key member states. And that's not at the benefit of anybody. So what are you going to see? You're going to see, I think, some negative side effects on the investor side. And we could come back and talk about what that's going to mean for the biotechs. But on the investor side, what that's going to mean is that you will invest, probably earlier or else much later. But there is going to be, and this is already kind of a valley of death for investment, is this area where you're building up to commercialization, right? And so you're going to see even more exodus of investors because they will not want to fund that, right? They will not. It will just not be enough impact on the revenue model to valorize that. And that's going to be
there's not even just That's not even just a question of the money, it's also the ability. I had a conversation with DG Santé, and they said that's a commodity. You can buy that. There are consultants out there who can do the launch in 27 member states. And reality is, no, it's not, because it hasn't happened before. It isn't something that's requested. Even large companies, pharma companies, say this is something we don't think we can do. Yeah. And it's also because it's not just in the control of you as a company to say, I want to, or I don't want to. You are basically dependent on the member states, their regulation, and how they play ball. So it is a very complicated situation that money just isn't sufficient to buy your way out of that.
No, it's definitely not. I would say that heads more into what I would add onto the biotech founder side. my lens of cost and investment is coming purely from the investor side. And that's where I say I do believe there will be an exodus there. Now, on the biotech side, you're absolutely right. I think this is a very tricky situation to orchestrate. It's already very complex in one or two member states. Now, all of them at the same time, I'm not sure that's really to the benefit of the patient either, actually, because doing something not even halfway, where you don't have full ability to access all of the physicians within that healthcare system, is that really giving access to more patients? I'm not sure about that. I would say rather change the legislation to be more flexible, make it easier for various member states to accept the proposal in one member state. And then you can, over time, really approach those markets. Now, incentives for people who do tap into unmet markets, some of the member states which are not very high onto the priority list, I have no problem with that being associated with an incentive. But I don't believe that there should be a kind of a malice mindset towards people who don't arrive to do that. It's an impossible feat.
Yeah, and that's something that's discussed widely. And Pernille Weiss, the rapporteur on the directive, has been very clear on that. And there's also others who chime in that that's just not something that's feasible and it should be taken out altogether. The question, of course, will be what is the process? What will be the end result? Because we're getting closer to the new to the elections for the new European Parliament. So we will see how much of a delay that brings. Most likely, it's at least the sentiment in general seems to be 2025 is realistic when we will have a final document that is actually voted on and will go through. So it's a long road, and I think it's all for us. All of us is very important to keep repeating these questions, these concerns that we have about the specifics. And one of the things that we've talked about as LSAA is also the tendency is to look just at the pharma package. But that's falling short because the pharma package doesn't live in a vacuum. It is something that is also impacted, like we talked in the beginning about, sources of capital, size of funds, number of VCs, exit options, market valuation. There are a lot of other things that influence the attractiveness for investors to invest in an EU company, and also with the perspective of staying in the EU. Because as we see at the moment, in many cases, the IPO is happening somewhere else in the world, which has all kinds of side effects. So it is a very complicated package, as you said. It's very complex, and it is meant to be safe for 20 years, 25 years. It's meant to be the wonderful sort of one-size-fits-all solution to fix the challenges for the system, but it isn't.
No, and as I highlighted just briefly already, I do think that some pieces within this legislation will have a direct impact on R&D investment. I'm all for affordable medication for patients, but this is going to come from somewhere and likely going to come from R&D budget. And the same, if you have to commercialize, within all of the member states within 2 years, this is as well going to come out of your R&D budget because the money has to come from somewhere. I mean, I am an investor. This is my perspective. But on the other side of that as well, I think you're going to actually, and this is completely opposite, I believe, to what they're trying to do. Because there is a piece of legislation there as well about unmet needs and rare disease medication, and that is wonderful. However, if you are now in this model where revenue becomes extremely important, then pharma companies and also investors are going to tend to shy away from rare diseases. They're going to shy away from the things which are not going to be the big blockbusters.
Mm-hmm.
So then we get back into the situation where, for example, Merck has been in the last couple of years, full focus on things like Keytruda, full focus on Ozempic, the big blockbusters. And that is clearly at the detriment of things like AMR, for example, as well, because now our R&D capital is limited, our resources to commercialize are stretched too thin. And so this will fully impact on the innovation model. And that, in terms of biotech, of course, it's one of the things we do at eureKARE is we go out and we test the market. We talk to pharma, we talk to downstream partners. We want to make sure that by the time the product is getting, towards, phase 3, that there will still be interest in that product. Now, if we don't determine that there's interest, it's very difficult for us to justify to our shareholders that this is a sound investment. Now, there are impact funds which might focus on some of those issues, but your typical VC, the aim is return on investment. So if there's no return that can be made because now pharma and distribution partners are interested in these smaller products because it's just too complex and too expensive, that will be at the detriment of innovation.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing that's not really understood from policymakers, at least, and bureaucrats in Brussels. Some feel that just throwing more money into the system is one solution, and the rest is more or less big pharma. What they don't realize is that this is the critical part of the pipeline where private money is the only money that keeps it going, because Horizon and other programs get to so far to a certain point, but the moment it becomes more expensive, it requires bigger investments. It really is the VC sector that is in a position to invest in that kind of level and bring the companies forward to a point that big pharma is saying, this is interesting enough now for us. We have enough evidence that this is a lower risk investment, and we are stepping in. If that part, this piece of the pipeline is drying out, is getting smaller and smaller, it will be or it will be noticed, and it will be effectful for the rest of the pipeline until the very end. So it will have a negative impact on patients and availability for specific drugs, for especially rare diseases, as you said.
Yeah.
Very bad situation that doesn't really help anybody in the end. I mean, I've been saying in several occasions, it's also fair and equal if nobody gets nothing. But that's not what we want. So it has to lead to something that is to the benefit of patients, because that is ultimately absolutely a goal that we all support.
Definitely. And I think, unfortunately, somehow pharma has become really politicized. It's become this political agenda topic. I mean, if we look at the US, this is clearly, inflation is a big problem today, right? And it's coming in Europe. It's already been a problem in the US a little bit longer. And because the general population is feeling the effects of inflation, this has put things like medications onto the political agenda. And oftentimes, politicians don't really understand the pharma network, right? They don't understand how much it costs to do R&D. How much does it cost to get a drug through the pipeline? And so it tends to turn into this rhetoric, which is really villainizing pharma. But the day that we have another COVID, there won't be any solution, because we have just cut it off at the feet, unfortunately. Now, I'm not saying that there are not people out there which are, profiteering within pharma. I don't name any names. I think we all know them. But to basically undermine the entire sector, this doesn't help anybody. And it won't just be about the patients. It will be about all of us, because the next endemic, we will, again, not be ready, right? I also do believe, personally, that Europe could still take some lessons from the US, despite this new legislation from Biden. And if you look at what the US has done, They have DARPA, they have BARDA. We all know about those programs, but they also have things like IMTech. They have CARBEX. There is, just really a lot of different nationwide, I would say, non-dilutive funding opportunities, which focus on specific areas within that. And they're focusing on innovation. They're focusing on things, various different subjects. I believe today that's something where Europe doesn't go far enough on. I think that there are initiatives under Horizon Europe, but it's just simply not enough money. And we're not taking enough big bets. If you put 200K here and 200K there and 200K there, a lot, it's like a small VC, right? You diminish your risk, but you're probably also not going to have a massive return, right? Now, if you would do a mix, so you say, okay, I take a handful of small risks so that I diversify my risk, but now I'm going to fully bet on 10 subjects where I say we go all in with massive amounts of capital to support those subjects, to really push R&D there. Well, that would be a kind of nice combined model that would take, the great part of European, subvention, which is, this kind of diverse risk model, and then take the US version, which is, kind of the way they spend on the military as well, right? And I think that would be very helpful for the European ecosystem.
Yeah, I think it's really strange because Europe still has such a great R&D base. We have so wonderful IP that is coming out of the system, and strangely enough, some feel that we have paid for the IP because it was developed in a government-funded institution or at a university and things like that, which shows again that they don't really understand exactly how the system works. But in any case, there's such a wonderful foundation. We have to be able to bring these to bear fruit within the EU. We have to provide an attractive environment for these companies to stay. We have to have a viable, liquid, effective capital market that they can go public on. And we have to find the ways of keeping these companies and growing these companies in the EU. At the moment, most of them go public somewhere else when they finally reach that stage. Yeah, I think we've given a lot of food for thought today in our conversation. It is an extremely pivotal point for the EU. It is a very important piece of legislation that has far-reaching consequences, and much more consequences than really just for driving innovation or strangling innovation in Europe, and definitely not necessarily helping growing the vibrant life sciences sector that is supposed to be another builder of wealth for the EU. We need to do better. We need to do different things. And you've pointed out some of the solutions or some of the steps that could be taken to make things better. I think it's very important that we keep talking about this. And as I said, it's a long road until we have a final piece of legislation in our hands. So I think for today, we've covered most of it. I just want to leave you with another opportunity to sort of wrap it up or put one key point that we maybe need to reiterate in your hands. So if there's something you want to add.
I think that's it's very tough to boil it down to one point, but I think that Europe in general is notoriously conservative. We often take these half measures, right? We do kind of half investment and half measures because we don't want to take big bets and big risks. And this is not the time for that. I would say patient cannot wait for us to take little half steps towards, improving their access to medicines. And so doing well thought out, big steps is going to help, and taking big bets as well within this landscape. And so that will mean Europe being an active financial participant within that. We cannot rely just on VC alone, because VC will start to look outside of Europe. Even European VCs will start to look outside, because what will be their benefit? So I would leave you with that thought.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I'm with you when it comes to the risk averseness of the EU. Germany is probably the worst one. But it is really time to switch the view from the system cost approach and trying to keep it as low as possible. And then suddenly we don't have the drugs that we think we need. And we have more than 400 in Germany on the short list that aren't available, at least not to the amount that they are needed. We need to switch, and we need to look at the opportunity cost as an investment into an industry sector that I think we all want to build and we all want to benefit from. So it's a very important aspect, and thank you for pointing that out again, because it is really something that we have to repeat because it is so embedded in our culture and also in the system in the EU. Of course, we need to get away from that, and we need to really look for developing wealth. We need to be more attractive and not just barely like the others. We need to be more attractive to really drive innovation in Europe.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Kristin, for joining us today. Great insights, and we hope to have you again at some point in time, and all the best and good luck with your funds.
Thank you so much, Rainer. It was really a pleasure, and happy to come back anytime.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Goodbye.
You.